Evening, friends. I welcome you all to the third of the Madras Musings Madras Week 2024 lecture stroke talk series. I'm delighted to see that there's such a turnout today. In the last 2 days, the turnout was not what it should be. And I was wondering whether the December music season finally played in Madras Week as well. But I'm glad to see that a staff speaker like Dr. Deborah Thiagarajan and Dakshinachitra. This evening, our story is about a remarkable success in the world of culture, particularly in showcasing our culture and our past. At a time when most museums are suffering from want of footfalls, and there is a question about what next and what we can do. And many take the very convenient route of blaming social media for all. It's very easy to say social media is responsible for everything. But the point is that Dakshinachitra has managed to stand all that logic on its head. I consider myself fortunate to be a board member of Dakshinachitra, of Madras Craft Foundation. And each time I'm amazed at the kind of work that is being done over there. It is truly a showpiece of what Chennai can do or what Madras can do. So I'm very thankful to Dr. Deborah Thiagarajan, Debbie to Friends, who is here today, to share with us her experiences of what it took to put this entire Dakshinachitra experience together and how it is sustained today and what is really, in the end of the day, what are the challenges that go into this running of Dakshinachitra? So, Debbie, I will ask the first question because that will get you off at the end of the day. What brought you to Dakshinachitra, or what was that long journey that culminated in Dakshinachitra? Let's start with that.
That's a question I most often asked. And when I came to India in 1972, my husband took me to Coimbatore. His family had just asked him to come and work in an ailing textile mill that they had. And just before that, I was very lucky. I got a job with the Tamilnadu Nutrition Project. And my job was to go to villages. I had a young assistant, a woman, who helped me with Tamil, and interview women who had children 2 years old and under, and who were pregnant. So we would spend about either 5 days to 2 weeks in each village. And it was, I say, an eye-opener for me, because I was in many, many homes, and I understood the hardship women went through, but also their generosity and humanity. So that was a major journey for me. And before that, when I was in Madras, I'd worked at MIDS as a volunteer, and I had to collate the data from a survey that was done on Dalits in the Tinnevelly district. And I learned how terrible it is to be an oppressed class and how much they suffered. So I had a bit of a history of Dalits, and of course when I went to the villages, we interviewed in all houses. It didn't matter what caste anybody was. And after I finished that project, I was asked by CARE, which is a US organization that was giving food for the midday meals program, if I could evaluate the distribution and quality of what was going on in the midday meal project in Tamil Nadu. And so I was in schools throughout Tamil Nadu. And I would add a third factor, which is that I married a chettiar, and I spent many weeks in Chettinad. So I learned how wonderfully chettiars had used craftspeople for their houses and the renovations they did of temples. So these three experiences really, first of all, it cemented my love of India, and it also gave me tremendous insight into Indian life, because village life is quite different from urban life. And this was again in the 70s. I'm sure things have changed since then, particularly for the role of women with self-help groups. But it was a very enlightening experience for me. But I also found that the villagers they felt that nothing that they, particularly the craftspeople, felt that nothing they did was appreciated. And this was a very weaver-heavy, intensive area. And weavers felt that handlooms would go out of style, and this was almost 50 years ago. And basically, the urban elite had replaced the British. And so the concept of what was good was very much urban and not what was rural. So that also made a difference. So I felt somehow that the arts that I came across in the village, and all the villages I went to, should be highlighted and appreciated. And even though it was the 80s, colonialism was still very much around. Meaning, just because you're independent doesn't mean that you can divorce colonialism from your head. And so, even when we started the project, young people had just begun to think, well, what is our heritage? Because before that, nobody asked those questions, because it was all British. So I felt this is a good time to set up a museum, and that's basically how it started.
Fantastic. There is one point that Debbie has not mentioned in today's intro, but several years ago when she was a participant in a Madras Week talk, the day she arrived here, Annadurai died.
Yes.
And she was isolated in a hotel with no chance of, it was, I think, the worst possible introduction to Tamilnadu.
I had taken a taxi from the airport, and my taxi driver heard that Annadurai had died. So where did we go? We went to the General Hospital. That's where his body was. and that was my formal introduction to Madras. So anyway.
So I always used to think, Debbie, that when I was growing up in Calcutta, that was the capital of the naysayers. So if you wanted to start anything, the worst place to do it is Calcutta, because the first thing they'd say is Hobena. That means it will not be done. It was only after coming to Chennai that I realized that Chennai is a very close second in this Hobena tradition. So I'm sure when you expressed your view that you wanted to start something like this, there must have been any number of people who came to tell you why it will not succeed.
Oh, exactly.
So can you tell us about
First of all, I don't think anybody understood what I was trying to do. So naturally they said, it's not going to work. But he was asking me what challenges I had. So I told him my first challenge was my own self-confidence. How was I going to set up a museum? I had no experience in setting anything up. And I would go with my in-laws to Meenakshi temple, and I really didn't understand what I was seeing when we went around the temple. And I thought, somehow I have to increase my knowledge if I'm going to set up a museum, particularly because I'm a foreigner. So I went with a friend, Chitra to Madras University, and I enrolled for a PhD under K.V. Raman. So then I realized after I started that it's a British system, and that means they have no classes, they have no courses. So I didn't have any background in art history. This was in the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture. And I thought, how am I ever going to get a balanced sense of what's going on? So I applied to the University of Pennsylvania. I'm now 38 years old. And luckily I got a grant, a full fellowship, to go and do my master's at Penn. And I went for 4 semesters, 4 years, 1 semester a year, and 8 months in India. I did my research for my PhD. And then I spent a 5th semester there working just on my PhD, because libraries in India are tough. To get the resources that an American university has is just almost impossible. Anyway, that worked out well. So with that, I felt, okay, at least with my anthropology background, now I have an art history background, so now I can begin. So that was challenge number 1. So then challenge number 2. We had no land, so after agonizing trips to the Secretariat over 6 years, the Tamil Nadu government gave us 10 acres of land on long lease. And the lease expires next year, by the way. And we had very little money. If we'd had money, I would have bought land, but we didn't have money to buy land.
Continue. So those were the, you would say, were the initial.
I would say those are the initial obstacles. Fundraising. I did a plan for the museum, not knowing that I would get 10 acres of land, looking for land in the city, and I applied to the Commissioner of Textiles to see if I could get funding, and anyway, we couldn't get any funding until we had the land. So once we got land, it was very easy to fundraise. Because when I went to the government, I told the government that for every rupee they give me, I would get 2 rupees from corporates. So actually, the museum has been set up through funding primarily from corporates in South India. And our volunteers, everybody fundraised. So the other questions of how do you set up a museum? Okay, so we got this 10 acres, and
Debbie has memorized all the questions, so I may as well not be here. You very beautifully flowed on to the next one. Okay. So fine, go ahead.
Oh dear. So anyway, how do we go about doing anything? So one of my friends, Maureen Murari, she introduced me to a cost and chartered accountant, Mr. Balakrishnan. So he streamlined our accounts, and he digitized all our accounts with a coder. And so we were one of the earliest organizations to have our accounts fully digitized. And then, okay, so that's one thing. Then what do we do for admin systems? So Mr. S. Mutaya, he introduced me to Mr. Vishweshwaran, who had been a vice president of Metal Box and had taken early retirement. So Vishweshwaran set in all the admin systems. He did everything I didn't like to do. Unfortunately, he passed away rather early. And then I was out trying, back then, 27 kilometers outside of Madras, no contractor wanted to come out. Nobody wanted to help me build. Now, once I got land, I went to Laurie Baker in Trivandrum. And I asked Mr. Baker, I said, can you give me an assistant to help me look at architecture in Kerala? And so he gave me Benny Kuryakos, who has been with us ever since. He was a recent graduate in civil engineering from the university in Trivandrum. So Benny and I went from the tip of Kerala to the top of Kerala, looking at architecture. We got a grant to do from the Crafts Museum in New Delhi to study the architecture of Kerala, 2-year grant, and then after that, 2 years for studying Tamilnadu architecture, and then Karnataka and Andhra architecture. And I put together teams for each of these projects, and they were consecutive, they weren't simultaneous. And when we did that work, we also learned a lot about the craft that people used. We did a lot of interviewing and a lot of documentation. And his question is, how did I plan the center? Thank you, Sriram. So,
This is just amazing. I have only seen Manohar Devdas do this. He would memorize all the slides and all the questions.
Because he couldn't see, but I can read.
Go ahead.
Okay. So anyway, Laurie Baker is the man who planned out the basic layout for the center. He looked at the map of India and said, okay, Tamil Nadu is here, Kerala is here, Karnataka is here, and Andhra is here. And that's exactly what we've done. And then he planned out the pathways and separating the public spaces from the historical spaces. So I really owe Baker a huge debt of gratitude. And all these people were pro bono. Nobody asked for money. What city is as generous as Madras? Truly. you know? So, anyway, one of the other people who helped was Sharma. Gone to the Ramakrishnan, president of LT at that time. Yeah. And I was actually going for funding. I was fundraise. But then I was having such trouble building this site because Laurie Baker thinks I could be an architect, but I can't. And no contractor will come out. So he said, I have just the right person for you. And Mr. Sharma had been his batchmate at L&T, and he had been in charge of these huge projects, both abroad and in India. But he just retired, and he'd had an accident, so he couldn't climb, which meant that he couldn't really supervise an L&T project. So I'm sure Mr. Ramakrishnan urged Mr. Sharma to join us, and he was with us for 8 years, and it's because of his brilliance. I mean, he hired the labor, the supervisor, he bought all the supplies, he made sure that nothing ever stopped, because he said, L&T, we don't stop one day in a project because we have a problem, we always continue. And so that was quite wonderful for us. And we had people who did they came forward to do our water supply. And how do you do water? An L&T guy did our earlier electrical plan. So all these guys, they did the main infrastructure. But then, what are the visitors going to see? How do we make the visitors be interested? And then again, I had more volunteers, women volunteers, whom I mentored every day. We talked hours on the phone every single day to each other. And I discovered that each one wanted to do something different. And so Visalakshi Ramasamy, she helped us with setting in the exhibitions and also the food sources. We opened a canteen thanks to her. Gita Ram, who was sort of my soulmate in Dakshinachitra. We'd worked together before Dakshinachitra doing craft workshops for kids. And so she developed the craft shop for us. And then Marine Marari did publicity. Gita Vasudevan did cultural tourism. And the Kausalya Jagmohan, who is, I don't know if she had become the honorary consul for France at that time or afterwards, but she brought a lot of VIP visitors to Dakshinachitra when we opened. And then we had Gayatri Krishnasamy, who just passed away. Yeah. And we were doing international seminars every year, and Gayatri was coordinating the seminars. And we started these seminars even before we opened the center. So documentation was very key for us. And then one critical person was a person called Lalita George. She's now in Hyderabad, but she was a senior supervisor, housekeeping supervisor at a 5-star hotel. And she said, look, even before you finish construction, you have to look at this site as a finished site. And she set in protocols for making sure that everything would be well maintained. And she hired a guy called Hilton, who then when he retired from us, he went to Visalakshi. And because of that, I think our site is well maintained. Touch wood, it will continue.
So arising out of that, you were talking about how you had I'll jump a couple of questions because I think what you said now becomes very relevant at that. You spoke about how you had a number of women volunteers.
Yeah.
Would you say that, the Dakshinachitra experience has been one of empowering people? Because I have seen over there people from various walks of life who work there. And I sincerely believe that it does make a difference to them that they happen to be in Dakshinachitra. So would you say that it has been an empowering experience? Are there any examples that you would like to share out of that?
I think so. I mean, V.R. Devika used to work with us in education. Then, I think one of my strengths is that I mentor people. I want to share whatever I know with people. And so that's about my major strength, I think. And so, like, B.R. Devika started her own trust, Asima Trust. Visalakshi Ramasamy started her own trust. And I think that, you know, other people, well, we have one philosophy at Dakshinachitra, which is that it should be a flat organization. I don't like hierarchies, my American experience. And I feel that everybody has to be treated with the same respect and dignity, no matter who they are. If they're a housekeeper or a gardener or a craftsperson, a performing artist, everybody should be treated with respect and dignity. I think that's very, very critical. And that, in the beginning, of course, was very much a part of our philosophy. When somebody comes in new, we try to make sure that they understand that. So, as far as empowering people who are there also, the earlier visitors are now parents, and they come to Dakshinachitra with their kids. And so we've had quite a few people say that they have, you know, they've come several times to Dakshinachitra as a child, and that's why they went into architecture, that's why they went into a field in the arts. And that's very satisfying. So, and we have an internship also. We have, for 16 years, we've had an arts internship where we take 10 students a year for 1 full year. And we train them, because when I started, there were no trained personnel in museum work. I mean, who was trained? Nobody. So I thought, okay, we're going to have to do our own training. And so that has been very successful.
It can have all of this, but what do you think has been the reason that people have been coming repeatedly to Dakshinachitra, particularly more number of people in the recent years? You've been seeing a huge increase in footfalls. One reason you've said is, of course, the fact that, you know, you've had second generation people coming in. But other than that, you know, my experience is that you can always call people in for the first time, but then getting them back.
We have a lot of return visitors.
Yeah, and museums seem to be failing on this count repeatedly. So how is it that you have been different?
Well, last year we had 265,000 visitors. And the first year we opened, we had only 8,000. So it took time for people to actually, you know, understand that Dakshinachitra was a place that they could come to and enjoy. And why did they come? I think, first of all, it's a soothing place to come to if there are not hundreds of school kids there. But where else do you come to a green space where you can sort of relax and look back at your culture? And I think that's very important. And our demographic, our visitor demographics have changed a lot. In the beginning, it was older people who came. Now it's young people. It's young parents. It's, you know, people 45 and under. Why are they coming? Okay? First of all, it's a great place to take a date. That we've seen. But more than that, I think people are looking back now at the past and saying, what can we learn from the past? Is this really how our grandparents lived, our great-grandparents lived? Was life really like that? It's so different today. And it's about nature and culture, I think. Also, there are not many places in Madras where you can go. But we did a survey right after we opened. What did people want? Because we were not getting any visitors. And people said, okay, we want to do things. We want to experience things. We just don't want to come and look like at a regular museum. So then we sat together and we thought, okay, what activities can people do? So we devised 20 different craft areas, even something like, you know, grinding or doing columns, whatever, which came from the culture that people could do. And that's been immensely popular. In fact, I'm always amazed. We make about 15 lakhs a year just from these 5, 10 to 20 rupee activities. So that shows that a lot of people are very interested in that. So I think that's one of the reasons people come back, is that they get a sense of satisfaction. And we get I mean, every once in a while we'll get a terrible comment, but most of the time we get very, very good comments. So there's always somebody who's nasty.
What about the events that you keep? Basically, one of the things that we see is most museums or most cultural showcases, they become very static over a period of time. There is nothing, you go there, you know exactly what is in this corner, what is in that corner. Sometimes even the cobwebs have remained the same, they haven't been shifted. But what do you think, in your place you've been repeatedly having new displays, new events, and the arising out of that, my other question is, the way you've been acquiring housing facades from various places.
Not facades, whole houses.
Whole houses. So how do you do that? How do you go about that? And what has been your experience in that?
Okay, well, just getting a house, each house at Dakshinachitra, there are 19 now, it takes about 3 to 3.5 years to find, because we only take houses that are going to be demolished. We don't take houses, we don't want to interrupt the cultural background from which these houses come. And when we did all this research, we decided we would take middle-class houses that are representative of houses that you'll find in 70 to 100 villages. So they're regional architectural prototypes. So that was not an easy thing to do, actually. This last year, we put up a Mapala house, a Muslim house from Kerala, and we put in an exhibition called The Living Ocean. And because we're going much closer to nature now, in the connection between nature and culture. And we're just finishing Kodava, a Korg house, Ainmanai, and we're just working on the exhibitions for that. That'll open in October. But the programs, we have a contemporary art gallery also, and we're doing a lot of programs for that. Next month in September we have KG Subramaniam's exhibition, and then in December we have a retrospective of our Palnyapan's exhibition. We have a lot of our exhibitions now are looking at nature, they're looking at climate change, so that's all very important. And we in the beginning when we opened, we tried to do massive events every month, and then we found out that we couldn't continue that because we'd get very exhausted. And this is all the women, all my friends, my volunteers, they're the ones, we all got together as a team and worked on events. So then we linked our events to festivals representing each of the states, and then we've introduced some other different events, and then with these festivals we bring in all the folk performing artists, and it's a continual challenge.
Yes. We were talking about challenges, so I think we can go on to the next one. What are the challenges today? You spoke about the challenges of the past.
Yes.
But what are the challenges of today?
I think the challenges of the day, particularly for our museum, are quite a few actually. First of all, most of our staff has been there between 10 to 20 years. So we're all getting older. And that has pluses, but that also has minuses. And the situation, the world is changing very fast. So last week, we just got our report. We've done a survey, an IT survey of the entire campus, from looking at all our computers, our fiber optics, we're there for preservation of culture. So are hard disks enough, extra hard disks, will they do the job? And what kind of IT do we want to bring in? Can we bring in augmented reality, which I'd love to bring in? It's all very, very expensive now. Until the prices come down, it's a bit tough. And so we put videos everywhere, but I think the aspirations of younger people are changing also. And I think young people, a lot of people are looking for growth. Where do I go if I come to a museum? What is my salary if I come to a museum? And I really feel that young people have to be passionate about the arts, passionate about what they're doing if they want to be in a museum. And so we have a lot of competition out there. But hopefully I think we'll get good people. C.K. Prahalad, the management guru, he used to come to Dakshinachitra. In fact, his son and daughter both had their wedding receptions at Dakshinachitra. So he asked me once, he said, "What do you think your challenges are going to be?" I said, "Money." He said, no, you're wrong. It's people. You're going to have problems with people. So I think that is one challenge. And then I think another challenge is, and this is true for all organizations, if an organization starts out small with one person in authority, and then it becomes very large, how do you change that organization structure? And that, so that you have multiple heads, but the communication between all of them. So, as we've been around for a lot of years, this IT report said that our departments tend to operate in silos. Now, that should not be. So the communication between everyone has to be there very fundamentally. So we are facing the same kind of problems that corporates and small businesses face, because we've grown a lot. We have to do, if we have 265,000 visitors, we have to do a lot of facilities for them. And fundraising, we've always, from 2008 onwards, we've been self-sustaining in salaries and operations.
Fantastic.
But we still fundraise for programs, and we fundraise for infrastructure. Now, this Kodava house that we put up is funded totally by Hyundai Mobis Foundation. The Kerala Mapla house was funded by Sundaram Finance and Breaks India. So we go to the public, and we did a lot of renovation to the Tamilnadu section. That was funded by Ford Motor Company. So it's the first time actually that the automobile companies have come in to work with us on CSR. So fundraising is also a challenge, because I think if we want to do what we want to do every year, we have to fundraise at least 1 crore a year. Our turnover is now 6 crores. But that is not enough for the future.
You know, it's very unusual to have someone talk about turnover, profitability in the context of culture. There is a very, I know this question is out of syllabus, but then the point is that it came to me because I keep reflecting on this, because personally, I and then Mr. Muttaya, Mr. Shankar, who helped us to set up Chennai Heritage, we all believed that there had to be a very strong financial foundation on which cultural organizations need to run. And there has to be a revenue model that can sustain it. You seem to have hit that sweet spot. But there are several, there is a strong element of thought in India particularly, that cultural organizations should not be having a revenue model. They need to be on charity. It's almost a matter of principle as to why should you be having a revenue stream. When do you think this, for instance, last week I was part of a seminar where they very confidently said that a cultural organization can depend only up to 10% on ticket sales for its revenue, and 90% has to come from corporate donations. I was stunned, because if there was a pandemic year and that 90% corporate donation just dried up and vanished, how will anybody be able to manage with 10% of their revenue continuing to run the entire operation? So when do you think this, is this at all changing, or has the Dakshinachitra experience helped people to really think differently? Where do you think it's going to go?
Well, in India as well as in Europe, the tradition has been that the government funds all museums. And I think that is what has caused this sort of, you know, stasis in thinking that you can be self-sustaining. In America, most museums, including the Smithsonian, have to raise their own money. You know, they get government grants. But a Smithsonian, if they want to do an exhibition, they have to raise all the money for that exhibition. The salaries will be paid, but they still have a huge lot of spend. In fact, I did a fundraising course at the Smithsonian. They told me, it's your duty to ask, and it's his responsibility to give to you. But But I think it's changing slowly. In America, many museums are set up by individuals. They have vast collections, and I think what do you do with a collection? And most people with a good collection would rather give it to a museum than have to take care of it themselves. But that's not so in India, because if you have a lovely collection, you want to make sure that your grandchildren and your children have it. But a lot of children aren't interested in it anymore. And that's true in the US. I think it will change as more museums start being role models. The CSMVS Museum, the earlier Prince of Wales Museum in Bombay, has been very successful. I'm always jealous of them because all the banks have their headquarters in Bombay, so they can happily tap 12 crores a year in fundraising, which we can't do. But I think it depends where you're located. Now, we're lucky that we're in Madras, but what does a museum do when they're out in a village or in a small town where the funds aren't there? I think that is a problem. I think, I think it's sort of like churches. I think churches have said they have to get revenue models. So what we do, which is very much like what many American museums do, okay, tickets are I think it's less than 50% from tickets. But then we have a guest house, we have a craft shop, we have, catering, food, and as I said, we do these small activities. And we've now gone into having weddings, and we've always had corporate events and seminars.
Did the Ambanis approach you?
I won't comment. And neither do the Adanis. but yeah, it'll take time for museums that are in small. They will have to be handheld, I think, for a while, and they'll have to. We hope that more communities will start small museums, which won't cost much to maintain. In fact, doing the research for this Kodava house, there are several Kurd men who've set up small museums. They've just started to collect, what earlier Korgis used, and like that, it doesn't cost much. But I think we have a ways to go.
What are the future plans for Dakshinachitra? Where do you see it going?
Well, I think we have to get, just as I said, C.K. Prahalad said people, so I think people is the most important thing. And I think, as I said, looking at the IT future, we have to go much more into IT than in the past, and we have to constantly work on getting, making the center interactive. But I think really we're now, because of climate change, we're looking much more closely at the connection between culture and nature, because people are getting so isolated from nature that we have to bring them back in some way that we can. So we have to see how it works out. We're working on these challenges.
I have one last question before we ask audience for any queries that they may have. What message do you think Dakshinachitra gives to museums in the city? Because right now, I think we have around 15 or 16 museums in Chennai already, private and government owned. And within the next 2 years, another 8 or 9 are going to be added to the list. None of them, all of them with grand plans for setting up, none of them with plans for running or maintenance or what's going to happen after that. Do you think you have a message there? You and I are involved in one, so we know we can't mention it. But
he's talking about Victoria Public Hall. Do I have a message for these museums?
Yes.
Well, they have to have, first of all, I think one dedicated individual who sees that nothing falls through the cracks and that everything goes as planned. And unless you can get a passionate person, it's going to be difficult. Because if it's a bureaucracy that changes every couple of years, then it'll go down. In the US, they say the average length of a board member in a museum should be no less than 12 years.
Oh,
Did you know that?
I did.
Because if you really want to make a contribution, you have to be there and understand the organization over time. And of course, it's considered very prestigious in the US to be a board member, and you normally pay about $10,000 a year for that privilege of being on the board. Now, we have a wonderful board. I wouldn't ask Sriram for any money, however. But we make them be active. And we've had wonderful people on the board in the past.
So, thank you.
That doesn't tell much message, but
I think it does.
I think it's sustained perseverance to get something to run well.
But it is still an amazing story. And maybe there is time for one more. You've been writing a lot as well, and your latest book is on the crafts of Karnataka.
Yes.
Would you like to just, because we do have time, and just this one question, your experience in writing about crafts?
Actually, I just published a book on the the craft of vernacular architecture and the performing arts of Karnataka. And I must say that book, I wrote the draft. I mean, these are all my field notes, because one of the things I love is going to villages. So I traipse all over the South. And I wrote it a couple of years ago and did nothing with it. And then I have a very persistent librarian who said, I have to do something with it. And so she nagged me and nagged me and nagged me. And so finally we put it together. And R.M. Palnyapan helped with the formatting, and our graphic artist, Prem, who was one of our very first employees at Madras Craft Foundation. In fact, he was our first employee. And I noticed he had talent, so I sent him to a graphics course. And then he's never looked back. After he left us, he's always been in graphics. But yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Members of the audience, I see a couple of hands going up over there. If your voice is loud enough, you can just stand up and speak.
So what happened during the lockdown when there were no people coming in, and how did you sustain that? And just on a follow-up to that, are you also, apart from this augmented reality and other things, having any digital plans, like having some kind of virtual tours or something like that, which some of the big museums are also doing, so that in an event that the museum is not accessible, then you still can experience things from.
Yes, we're working on an audio tour. We had a story tales trail, but they said it was valid only for 3 years, so they wouldn't extend it. So now we're working on a new audio trail. And yes, actually we had a virtual tour of Dakshinachitra. It was up for a couple of years. That was a few years ago. But we will work with that. We're working on putting all our collections online. We're trying to do a lot more with the internet than what we've done in the past. I think every organization has to do that. So, and you asked how we sustained ourselves, and we were very fortunate. We got a Ford Foundation grant. We became self-sustained. We opened in 1996, but it took us till 2008 to be self-sustaining. And Ford Foundation hand-held us through all of this. They are the only foundation which gave, they give 3-year grants, and you can hire staff and do programs without. In India, grants end after 1 year. So there's no way you can hire people, because you have to let them go after 1 year. So we were able to sustain our staff through 2008 until we could do it ourselves. So that was a huge help. Now then the government threw out the Ford Foundation because they were interfering with human rights, and particularly in Gujarat. So we were very lucky. We came in at a time when Ford Foundation was working on culture and education. So that was very important for us. Did I answer all your questions? Or was there, did I leave out one?
My question was more on the lockdown period.
During the COVID times,
How did we manage in COVID time? We were closed for 13 months, and then people were very slow in coming back. And I think we were one of the few organizations that paid full salaries throughout the whole COVID time. And people, you know, like our housekeeping staff said, they were the only family in their village that still had an income. So it was really tough for people. But we have a corpus of 9 crores, and that is a sort of a cushion for us. And so we were able to pay salaries, but it wasn't easy. And I think one of the reasons we had such high visitorship last year is that people finally said, COVID's over, and we can all get out. So yeah, but self-sustaining it's always something one has to. In fact, we have to look in the future. What more can we do because salaries constantly go up, and we have to be able to meet the demands of our staff. That's very important.
Rajgopal Venkatraman.
Yeah, any outreach plans for government school students in particular?
We do a lot. Bye, Rennie. We do a lot with schools. In the beginning, we used to do a lot of outreach programs, and then I felt it wasn't efficient use of our staff, because then the staff and the craftspeople have to go to the school, the transport has to be there to bring them back, and so it's a loss-making proposition. But a lot of the schools come, and now we're working on how do we attract schools from all over India. So we need to look at more boarding facilities. We have a guest house, but they'll come with 60 kids. So education, we're revamping all our education programs, looking at how we can do different kinds of programs and bringing in different resource people. So we're now looking a lot more at outside resource people to be able to bring in new programs.
One, into the past, the nugget. How did you hit upon the name Dakshinachitra? And the second one, what has been the government support currently? I tell you why I asked you this question is because you said next year the lease will expire. And there's been a sort of track record in the past where leases expire and become public parks. So how are you acting in that aspect?
Well, I have to credit our Nagasamy, the archaeologist who's now no more. I went to him one day, I said, I need to name this museum, how do I name it? He immediately said Dakshinachitra, Vision of the South. I didn't realize it would be such a difficult name though for North Indians. But, and the second thing is with the government, we have been going, as we always do in the past also, from person to person, we've looked at made a request to the revenue officer, finance, officer, the secretary, to the chief minister. We are constantly in contact, and all I can say is we hope that our fingers are crossed. Most of the time they tell us, look, we know we can't run it. Actually, the land is from the tourism department. They said, we know what you're doing, we cannot do. So I don't think they're really in a hurry to take us over, but then with the government, you never know. We have an ex-IAS officer on board, and she sort of, tells us what to do, but we don't know how the government will think in 10 years or 20 years. They want to build a big convention center right next to us. And I can't imagine the traffic on the ECR if they do that. But let's see, they have 45 acres next to us, the government does. So far they don't need our poor 10 acres. So let's see. But I'm quite positive that because we get a lot of presidents from countries. Anytime a dignitary comes south, any ambassador comes, any like president of Switzerland or Austria or Singapore, they all come to Dakshinachitra. So they know it's a place that VIPs go to. So I think that will help us. I think that will be a... And then we've taken money from all their corporates. So we have to use our strategies to see, you know, but corporates have to make sure that the money they invest has long-term profit.
Any other question? Yes, Prema?
Has cinema world approached you for shootings there?
We don't allow film shootings unless it's like Revati, who's one of our friends of Dakshinachitra. But we do make money through people who want to do small shootings. Like there's some fashion shootings going on, wedding shootings, now even pregnant shootings. I'm always amazed. But film shootings and advertisements, we don't allow really. We have very strict rules for all of that.
How do you change the museum from exhibition center to activity center? How are you going to change?
See, what we did is,
Philosophy of museum.
yeah, so as soon after we opened, as I said, we conducted a survey. And people said they wanted to experience, they wanted to participate, they didn't just want to look. And so even that we have to work more on also to see what other opportunities we can provide for visitors to experience. So I guess it was just part of our philosophy right from the beginning. Any other questions?
I don't think so. I think questions we are done with. So thank you once again for having been part of Madras Week celebrations. Of course, a small token of our appreciation for having come here today. Thanks a lot.